Hello everyone, it's Miss Sarah from Kaukauna Public Library where I host our fiber arts group, and so today I'm going to teach you a virtual crochet class. It's the same class that I teach at the library sometimes, and I can always show you at our fiber arts group as well, which we'll hopefully be meeting again soon. So we'll go ahead and get started. I'm just going to teach you the basics today of a good way to get started with crochet. So what you need is tools at first. Of course, some yarn. There's lots of different kinds of yarn you can use. What I recommend when you're starting out is what's called a worsted weight yarn. You might see a number 4 on the yarn label for the yarn size. This is wool. Acrylic is great also, especially when you're starting out. I like to work with wool just because it has a little bit of grip to it and texture to it. Another thing, of course, you'll need is a crochet hook. Now, if you're working with a worsted weight wool, I recommend somewhere between a 5 and 6 millimeter hook. I don't know if you can see this on here because it's kind of rubbed off because I use this hook a lot, but this is size H8 or 5 millimeter. Now the H8 is the American sizing. You'll see different hooks made in different countries use different sizes, which is why I like to go by the millimeters because those don't change. So this is a 5 millimeter hook here, and this one is made of wood. I like to use wood because it's slightly flexible, so it can help with hand fatigue. Another thing that can help is if you have a metal hook with a grip on it, like this one. It's good to hold, good for your ergonomics. There's a couple different ways to hold hooks. This is called the pencil hold. A lot of people use this hold. This is the overhand hold. This is how I hold my hook. How you hold your hook doesn't make any difference into how your crochet will turn out. It's just whatever is most comfortable for you. Aluminum hooks like this, they tend to be slippery. So when you're working, sometimes it's easier to get it into the stitch, but it's also easier to have loops fall off of it. So it might depend on what yarn you're using. If you're using a slippery hook with a slippery yarn, that could lead to some frustration. I prefer the wood, like I said, so that's what I'll be using today. A little crab here is holding onto my stitch markers also. These are very handy to have when you're working in crochet. You want a stitch marker that can open and close. These ones are like little safety pins. If you have safety pins, those work too. Paper clips also work. You just loop them through the stitch. You can get these at any craft store, and they're handy for marking your place or marking an important stitch or marking the front of your work if the front or back matters in a pattern, which sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't. So they're handy to have. Not absolutely necessary for getting started though. You will need some scissors. I have little craft scissors. Any scissors will work. And for finishing your work, you'll need a tapestry needle, which is a blunt needle with a nice wide eye that you can fit your yarn through. So that's really all you need to get started. All you absolutely need to really get started is just a hook and the yarn. The rest are accessories. Here I can have my little Mr. Crab here hold on to them for us. All right, so let's scooch him out of the way here. The first thing we're going to do is we need to get our yarn onto our hook. And to do that, we're going to use a slip knot. If you don't already know how to tie a slip knot, that can be the trickiest part about getting started. The best way that I've found to make one is you start with a loop. So just make a loop of your yarn with the tail crossing over top of what's called the working yarn that leads back to your ball of yarn. And then you just kind of drop that tail and bring it behind the loop so that it looks like a little circle with a line through it, like a do not enter circle. And then you just pick up that strand so that your hook is in front of the circle but underneath that middle loop, and then you just pull it, and then you can cinch it up to your hook. So you might need to watch that a couple times. You can rewind this, take a peek back, and see how that's done. I'll do it flat on the table here too, sometimes that's a little easier to see. So I make my little circle, I bring my tail under it, and then I just pick up just that middle part, and then take your two ends and pull them tight. So once you've got your slip knot on your hook, you want that cinched up to your hook, and kind of tighten it down a little. You don't want it tight on your hook though. You want it to be loose enough that your loop moves freely on your hook before you tighten it. Otherwise, it's going to be very difficult to get back into that loop later, which we'll need to do. So the next step is how you're going to hold your yarn and hook. I mentioned before there's a couple different ways to hold your hook. Go with whatever feels natural to you. How you hold your yarn is also not critically important. What's important is the amount of tension on the yarn between your hand and your hook. So you want to always have enough tension so that the yarn is held straight, but you don't want it to be really tight because it will make your stitches too tight and it will also wear out your hands. So how I hold my yarn is I wrap it around my hand a few times, and then I wrap it around my pointer finger a few times. And then what I can do is raise or lower my pointer finger to either adjust the tension or to let off another loop and feed myself more yarn. What I would recommend doing is not thinking about what this hand is doing that much. Instead, just focus on what the yarn is doing, making sure this isn't too tight here. That way, you will naturally kind of fall into a position with your own hands of how you want that tensioning to work for you. So I'll go ahead and wrap myself up here. So the first thing we're going to do is create our foundation, which is going to be the chain stitch. So how we make the chain stitch, we want to support our work. So what I do is I take these two fingers, or you can use whatever fingers you have available, and I just kind of pinch that knot so that it's not getting away from me too much here, so that it's secure. So I hold that in place, and now my yarn is tensioned and the hook is free and this hand is free to crochet. So what I'll do is I'll bring the hook in front of the yarn, grab the yarn with it, kind of rotate my hook as I pull it through the loop that was on the hook. And that is one chain. So now I'm going to kind of pinch that chain, and now you can see this is where you're controlling your tension here. How loose or tight your chain is going to depend on that tension. If you make it too tight, you're going to have a real hard time working back into this chain later. So make sure you're keeping it nice and loose. Keep your hands relaxed. Anytime you start to feel your hands tensing up, just take a deep breath and let them kind of fall limp for a second and relax. All right, so I'm going to do that again. I grab my yarn, rotate my hook to pull it through the loop on the hook. And I'm just going to keep doing this until I either have as many chains as my pattern calls for, or until my piece is as long as I want it to be, or as wide as I want it to be. So for class purposes, I'm not going to make a very big piece. I'm just going to make couple chains here. So you can see I've just done that same motion over and over again, and what that gives me is my chain. So this is what the chain looks like. The chain has its own anatomy, so to speak. The front of your chain looks like a braid. You can see these little V's. Let me see if I can get it to focus on that better. There we go. You can see these little V shapes. Those are the braid. That's the top of your chain. The bottom of your chain has what looks like a little spine, little bumps. So how you work into your chain will be determined by your pattern. Usually it will say it wants you to work under both top loops, which would mean underneath that V, or it might want you to work in the back loop or the bottom loop, which would be the spine. If it says back loop only, oftentimes that can be misleading because you might think that would be the spine, but typically that means just under one loop of this braid structure. And that's what I'm going to do. I think that's the best way to start when you're beginning because it's the easiest to work into. So I'm going to pick my yarn back up here. And now I'm looking here at the beginning of my chain. Now we don't work into this very first chain opening because that one's already kind of attached to our hook. So what we want to do is work into the back loop of that first V right here. So I'm going to insert my hook kind of into the middle of the V. If you think of the V as like little hearts, right into the center of the heart to pick up that one back loop. And then I'm going to just hook my yarn and pull it up through the stitch. So now I have two loops on my hook. I have my original chain here, and I have the loop I just pulled up through the next chain space. Now I'm going to make a single crochet stitch. So what I want to do then is grab my yarn again and pull it through both of those loops like that. So I'll do that again here on the next one. We move on to our next V on our chain. Put our hook behind, through that V, behind that one bar. Grab our yarn and pull it up. So now we have two loops on the hook. We're going to grab our yarn again and pull it through two loops. And these are single crochet stitches. And I'm just going to keep doing this all the way across. So in the next V, insert the hook, grab the yarn, pull it through, grab the yarn, pull through two. So we just do that all the way across our chain. And you can see where if you've chained too tight, getting your hook into that V can be difficult. So if you're struggling to get your hook in, maybe pull out your chain stitches and make a new chain that's a little looser, and it will give you less of a headache when you're working back into it. Now the trickiest one to see is your last chain. So you don't want to work into the knot, just into the chain that you made after the knot. So we'll want to work into that last chain, make our single crochet, and then once I've made that last one, I usually take my slip knot there and tighten it up a little bit so I don't have a gap. So there I have my first row of single crochet into my chain. And that's what that looks like there. Now we need to turn around to go back the other direction. So to turn around, you need to bring your stitches, your yarn, up to the height of the next row. So to do that, once you've finished your last single crochet stitch into your chain, you're going to make a new chain, just one. Just chain one there. And what that does is it brings you up to start your next row. Now what we're going to do is flip our work around to work back the other direction. And what I do is I'm kind of holding on to that knot at the corner. I just flip it like that. So now we're looking at the back of our work, at the back of our single crochet row. And you can kind of see that V pattern is there on the top of your work again, just like it was for your chain. And you can kind of see the space underneath the V are those little holes all along. So when we're working single crochet, we are going to work under both strands of that V along the top of our work. Now for single crochet, we're going to start in that very first stitch, which was the last stitch we made before we did our chain one. So you can kind of see the space there where you want to put your hook. And when you insert your hook, you'll see it's under both strands of that V. And you're going to grab your yarn and pull it through the stitch so you have your two strands on your hook again. And then you're going to grab the yarn and pull it through both of those. So now you've made another single crochet stitch into your previous row of single crochet. So we're going to do that again into the next one is right there. You can see under both strands of that V. Grab your yarn and pull it through. So you have 2 loops on your hook. Grab your yarn and pull through 2. So we're going to do that all the way across our row into the next stitch. Under the V, pull it up, grab your yarn, pull through 2. Now the tricky one is when you reach the end of the row, because you'll see at the end here, your stitch kind of slides down the side of your row. If you look on the top edge of it, you can see that little V structure there. You want to work under both strands of that. But because it kind of slides down, sometimes it's easy to think that you've reached the end of your row when you haven't. So you want to make sure you pick up that last stitch. And sometimes that's where a stitch marker can come in handy. You can put your stitch marker, I'll show you, your little stitch marker. You can put your stitch marker into that stitch and then fasten it so that when you come back to it, it's easier to find. That's one thing they're handy for when you're starting out. So we'll do another row. So we've reached the end of our row, and what we need to do now again is chain 1 to bring our yarn up to the new level. Flip our work around so we're looking at the back again. You can see our chain structure, our braid structure there on the top, those little V's that we're going to work under. And we're just going to go back just like we did last time. I'm going to insert our hook into that first stitch under both strands, pull up a loop, pull through 2. We're going to do that again all the way across. Under each stitch. And you can start to see we've got some real fabric forming as we get a few rows in. Ooh, need some more yarn. So there's that stitch there, and now you can see I've come to the one that has my stitch marker in it. So I'll just take my stitch marker out, and then there's my last stitch. So you can see how the rows line up there under each other, create this nice textured fabric. I'm working pretty loosely this time so that we could kind of see the spaces through it. Depending on what size hook and what size yarn you have, you'll either have a tighter fabric or a looser fabric. You can do that to your liking. I recommend sticking with a looser fabric when you're starting, just so that you don't run into the frustration of trying to, force your hook into stitches where it's difficult to work into. So we would just keep doing it like that. We'd chain 1 again, work back across, and just keep going for single crochet stitch, which is the only stitch I'm going to show you for today. But say you wanted to make a single crochet scarf and you had, and now you're finished, and pretend this is a really long scarf. How do you finish then? So when I reach the end of my row, I would cut my yarn, or when I reach the end of my yarn, if this is the end. And what you would do is just, if this is the loop on your hook, I would just pull it up and then just grab your tail and pull it through and then cinch it down. And that ties off your work. So you don't need to tie a big knot in it, just cinch it like that. And then for finishing your work, instead of putting any big knots in, because knots do come undone when you wash them. I have lost some work that way when I was first starting off. You take your tapestry needle, thread your yarn through the eye of it, and what you would do is you would just take this and weave it through your stitches back and forth a little bit. So you can see on a crochet stitch, it has these little legs underneath your V's. See how each one has two little legs there? I hide my yarn behind those. So I would just thread my needle behind those legs for a couple of stitches along, and then pull it through. Don't pull too tight because you don't want to pucker your fabric. But you can see that it's pretty much invisible under there. And then I want to go back the other direction once to really secure it. So I would skip the first leg here because I want to kind of have it wrap around that leg. You don't want to go right back under the same ones or you'll undo your weaving. So just go skip that first one and go back under those same legs again to the end. Pull it through again, but not too tight so you don't create a gap in your fabric. And I just kind of tug that to even it out. And then I would take my scissors and I would just snip that end close to the fabric. And then there you go. You can't even see your end or your knot there. It's hidden. And I would do the same thing at this side here. So that is how to get started with crochet. Feel free to ask any questions you have in the comments. If you have enjoyed this, please interact with the post in some way so that we know that it's valuable information for us. You can just hit like or leave me a comment or a question. If you want, please tell me what it is you most want to crochet or make, and I will try and find you a free pattern for what it is you'd like to make. So that's going to be all for this installment of learning how to crochet. Thank you so much, and hopefully I will see you soon at Kaukauna Public Library. In the meantime, if you would like, we have dozens and dozens of great crochet pattern books on the shelf at the library, and we are doing curbside pickup right now. So I can post some book recommendations in the comments below for you to check out. If any of them look good, you can go to our website or give us a call and we can set up a curbside pickup of some crochet books for you. So take care. Thanks so much, and I will see you later.